She has brought immense joy into our lives. However, there is an added burden of responsibility when taking care of two young children, particularly with George present. A small monkey, that's him. The well-kept lawns of Clarence House resounded with the laughter of children, but in a moment all that changed. The self-assured 9-year-old princess who had been enchantment all afternoon, Princess Charlotte, broke down in tears. Cold and pallid from shock, Queen Camilla stood motionless. Prince William then made an appearance, watching the scenario with increasing rage. The picture of royal peace would be shaken by what transpired next. It was a garden party unlike any other. Whispers of an impending storm had been gathering behind the shiny silver platters and ceremonial bows. A child's anguish ruined everything in the blink of an eye due to a miscommunication in a whisper. In reality, what did Camilla say? Why was the pain so intense? The chemistry between the royal family was transformed by William's reply. If you enjoyed this and would like to hear more stories about the royal family that they did not want you to know, please subscribe, like, and stay tuned. It was going to be the picture-perfect garden party. Every detail of the yearly children's garden party at Clarence House had been carefully considered. Under blossoming trees, rows of white chairs sat, their shadows tracing delicate lace patterns on the grass. Patties of cucumber were presented on silver platters. Tea served in delicate china jugs with miniature eclairs. Under the warm spring sun, children dressed in pastel dresses and shirt collars played croquet and hide-and-seek, their laughter resembling champagne. It was the type of affair where parents urged their children to keep smiling for a bit longer, and royal photographers sighed with pleasure. As if she had mastered the art of hosting for years without letting anyone in on too much, Queen Camilla glided gracefully through the gathering. With the graciousness that comes from years of public life, she knelt down to welcome the youngest attendees, compliment ribbons, and offer compliments. Despite this, most people failed to notice the fragility behind her eyes, the halting of her smile before it could reach its intended recipient, and the excessive time that passed between her remarks. Something seemed wrong to the expert observer. But Princess Charlotte shone. Wearing a flowery dress, the 9-year-old appeared to sparkle with each stride. She had small pearl clips fastened to her chestnut hair. Her demeanor was that of a monarch born into duty, yet her greetings were full of the innocent innocence that made every curtsy feel special. She was everyone's favorite because her laughing was natural, her stance was self-assured, and she could effortlessly switch gears between topics. Despite the apparent lack of tension, one guest made the comment that Charlotte seemed more at ease in the royal family's company than some of the adults. On multiple occasions, onlookers spotted Queen Camilla casting an unidentified glance at Charlotte. Something more akin to longing than anger or jealousy might have been at work. Camilla seemed to be smiling at Charlotte with a little more firmness than normal, and her comments seemed more professional, according to multiple aides who recalled the incident afterwards. There was no coldness nor warmth, there was just kindness. The more time passed in the afternoon, the more noticeable this slight contradiction became. Her Majesty's pace decelerated. At the periphery of discussions, she remained. Her Majesty had been noticeably silent throughout the morning, according to a senior staffer who made the discreet comment. The program continued, nevertheless. It seemed like yet another royal success as guests laughed and youngsters whirled for the cameras to catch. But behind the warm sunshine, a delicate thing was starting to break. And the teacups would break before they were even finished. The naive youngsters inquired. Somehow managed to pick up on the details that grown-ups do their best to conceal. Children see right through adults' pretenses, which they maintain with courteous smiles and scripted answers. Even at the tender age of 9, Princess Charlotte had emerged with an unassuming sensitivity that frequently astounded those around her. Amidst the distant clink of croquet balls and the swaying of laughing in the garden breeze, Charlotte caught sight of something that others had failed to notice. There was no outward sign of change or noise. It was the way, when she thought no one was looking, Queen Camilla's eyes lingered a bit too long on the horizon. The subtle quiver in her palm as she returned a cup to its saucer. A melancholy that was out of place at the celebration was something Charlotte felt deep down. Charlotte wandered off as the rest of the kids congregated around the magician by the main fountain. She wasn't attempting to cause a scene or cause trouble. She just wanted to know. Camilla waited in the shade of an old cherry tree, watching the crowd, but obviously not part of it. Her floral dress skirt brushed against the soft lavender along the pathway as she approached. "Grandmama," Charlotte murmured softly, utilizing the formal title she had learnt to use with reverence and kindness. "When you believe no one is looking, why do you appear so downcast?" Quiet as a thunderclap, the query cut through the air. Coldness gripped Camilla. She remained silent for a while, as if praying she had misunderstood. However, Charlotte remained steadfast, her worried expression visible on her little brows. This was not an attempt to provoke a debate. The intention was not to reveal. It was entirely disarming in its simplicity. The garden went on all around them. A chorus of birdsong resounded. Discussion centered on schools and vacations among parents. As he laughed uncontrollably, a small child spilt lemonade all over his shoes. The recent event did not interrupt the normal flow of life. However, something had unquestionably happened within Camilla. Looking at her step-granddaughter, she was at a loss for words. No, that wasn't a loaded question from the press. No employee was bothering her about her availability. The youngster had looked past her prim and proper demeanor and wanted to know something genuine. Nor was Camilla the queen consort at that same moment. All it took was a child's forthrightness to catch her off guard. It would have been more natural for her to offer a polite redirection, smile softly, or maybe even open up a bit. However, Camilla was preoccupied with something else. Maybe it brought back memories of her own distant, infrequently visiting grandchildren. Maybe the unease she felt from being alone had become too apparent. For some reason, she remained unyielding. She felt an itch. Unpredictable but gradual changes were about to unfold in the garden as a result of what came next. Even though Charlotte's query was harmless, the afternoon's outcome would hinge on the response, or lack thereof. That was a stern reaction. The following events were far from fitting for a royal garden party. Queen Camilla's remark shattered the glass ceiling in a realm where reserved politeness and staged smiles rule. It was abrupt, unexpected, and unreversible. Those around her were hoping for a kind remark about how caring Charlotte was, a playful chuckle, or maybe even a mild apology. Instead, they were treated to an experience that rendered even the most seasoned courtiers speechless. Camilla added in a firm, unyielding voice that little girls shouldn't ask questions about topics they don't understand, specifically asking Charlotte. Instead of interfering with things that don't affect you, maybe you could count your blessings. The statements were so powerful that not even silence could mitigate their impact. As if to inquire if she had understood correctly, Princess Charlotte blinked and parted her lips slightly. In an instant, her once bright and inquisitive expression faded. A few moments ago, the youngster had been the garden's delight. Now, she remained still, her little shoulders stiff and her eyes locked on the woman who had just hacked her down. Instead of a tantrum or a theatrical wail, the child's painful silence betrayed her pain at having trusted someone to sting her. Not far away, a mother hurriedly averted her child's gaze from the situation. At the tea table, a gentleman made an excessively loud noise by clearing his throat. A palace staffer, who had received training to detect and alleviate any kind of pain, gripped the program a bit too tightly. No one did anything despite everyone knowing what was happening. Camilla seems momentarily taken aback by her own remarks, as if she were cognizant of the seriousness of her tone. She hesitated to speak out of embarrassment or pride, but her lips quivered as if she wanted to muzzle what had just slipped out. Being extremely cautious with her public persona, the queen consort had recently scolded a 9-year-old, and not just any youngster, but the future king's daughter. Charlotte kept silent as her eyes welled up with tears. Standing where Camilla had left her, she attempted to steady herself, her chin quivering. As a kid who was born into a media-saturated culture, the scrutiny wasn't the worst thing. The unanticipated brutality came from somebody who was meant to be protected. A handful of news cameras continued to flash from the far end of the garden, oblivious to the subtle drama that was taking on. However, as one got closer, a noticeable change became apparent. Something far more delicate and perilous than anybody had anticipated had snatched away the afternoon's joyous tide. Unfiltered feelings revealed in a regal context. Even Camilla's hesitant steps revealed her reluctance as she turned to walk away. That instant could never be reversed. Even though no one said it out loud, the air had changed, and the perfectly stitched seams of regal perfection were starting to tear. As if her impressionable mind was still processing what had happened, Charlotte's face drooped slowly near the breaking point. Tears welled up in a quiet, piercing grief, the type that cuts deeper than any outcry for attention could muster. It wasn't drama that made her little shoulders tremble, it was hurt and bewilderment. Neither intruding nor insulting was her intention. Just out of empathy, seeing what others had missed, she had dared to raise a question. And she had been reprimanded like a misbehaving child in front of an audience in the yard. The change was slight but noticeable right away. The party's easygoing vibe eventually melted away. Even the children, who had just been giggling, began to walk more slowly as if they could feel the tension building up around them. The party's resident magician sensed a change in energy and stopped mid-trick. Protective looks from parents drew their youngsters nearer as they drew nearer to themselves. Mute muttering replaced audible speech. A momentary fixation on the area surrounding the cherry tree was followed by a rapid disengagement. Camilla remained still. Even the composed queen consort, who never lost her composure in public, became plainly distressed. Her cheeks were pale, and her mittens quivered slightly. This was not what she had intended. She couldn't refute what had already happened, but that much was obvious. She had spoken remarks that brought a 9-year-old girl to tears in front of dozens of people, including visitors, peers, reporters, and palace aides. Not just any child, but the future Queen of England's daughter, Prince William's daughter. A horrible quietness pervaded everything. Rather than a feeling of majesty, it was anxiety. Decisions were apprehensive. Despite their training to handle sensitive circumstances with imperceptible accuracy, the royal personnel now hesitated. What if they intervened? How about they step in? However, a middleman is required to resolve the dispute between the Queen and the child. Charlotte did not take any action to flee. While a few tears trickled down her cheeks, she remained steadfast and used the back of her palm to wipe her face. Once filled with awe, her eyes now betrayed a level of bewilderment that befits a person so young. Having a tantrum was not her intention. She was being perfectly serious. She was only attempting to make sense of the vicious response to her charity. At last, Camilla moved forward a single stride before pausing. As if to say sorry, her jaw drooped slightly, but she couldn't find the right words. Likely a case of excessive pride. Way too much shame. Perhaps, at that very second, she was ill-prepared to confront the things she had shattered. It was no longer festive in the garden. The sensation was similar to that of a portrait with a central crack, the image still complete but altered irrevocably. There was damage. Even though the light was still shining, a shadow was now subtly hanging over Clarence's house. The cascading impact. The garden had lost its festive atmosphere. The shocking news of what had transpired between Princess Charlotte and Queen Camilla swept around Clarence's house like wildfire. Nobody had said anything, and there had been no outward sign of conflict, but everyone knew. The tremor was inaudible. It showed up as sideways looks, rigid body language, and a total lack of sound as joking was stifled. Protection of the palace quietly started to shift positions, ever present but unobtrusive. Men in sharp suits retreated to the group's outskirts, their earbuds humming softly. Physical danger was not anticipated, but there was an undeniable feeling that something had changed, something too delicate to disregard. The Queen Consort was embroiled in an emotional incident that left a young royal child in tears in front of an audience of onlookers. That needed to be contained, both literally and metaphorically. A shift was noticeable to the press, who had spent the first hour photographing idyllic scenes such as the luster of Charlotte's dress, the curve of a child's swing, and the clink of teacups in the midday sun. Looking away from the croquet field, the cameras focused on the perimeter, where helpers mumbled something urgent and faces became serious. As a photographer, you're supposed to be able to spot fleeting moments like this. Every shutter click became more deliberate and planned as the energy of the gathering shifted from pleasure to caution. It was the kids' reactions, though, that revealed everything. Their pace slowed as they shifted their gaze from Charlotte to their parents. Before, they had been laughing and racing. Even though nobody was paying attention, the magic act went on. As she whispered to her mother, a small girl in a bright yellow outfit asked, "Why is the princess crying?" Because she was at a loss for words, her mother knelt down and gave a soft, evasive answer. Two youngsters put down their tag game and sat on the grass near the rose bushes to observe. Even if they don't fully grasp the nuances of royal tradition, they can sense when things are getting heated. Even before adults give it a name, kids know it. Something holy had broken open for them today. Trust, rather than a crown or a title. Someone slapped a child's hand away from them as they extended it to ask a question. Even if they couldn't express it quite yet, that was a lesson that every child there would take with them. The Queen Camilla, meantime, maintained her distance. Her body language was unnatural and unintelligible. In an effort to lighten the atmosphere, a handful of attendees approached her and attempted small talk, but their attempts fell flat. Even after a compassionate assistant had led Charlotte to a more peaceful spot, the scar they had left was still visible. With each delicately knit thread, the facade of the idyllic royal afternoon was crumbling, and the tale that lay behind it was only getting underway. A visit from the father. With a calculated serenity, he entered Clarence's house through the arched garden doors, but his very presence changed the air as if it were the first faraway rumble of an impending storm. Just a moment ago, he had been lounging in a study in the sun, going over diplomatic briefings for a trip of the Commonwealth that was about to happen. The day had started off in the same expected, regimented, and obligatory fashion as every other royal engagement. However, a low-voiced assistant, a knock at the door, and a sentence that required no explanation followed. "Please, sir, I have a problem in the garden. Princess Charlotte is the subject." And that was the final step. Having moved to the perimeter of the assembly, Prince William surveyed his surroundings with a single, well-practiced sweep. Charlotte was the first person he looked at. Sitting alone near the base of a tree, his daughter, the center of his universe, had her knees slightly drawn in and her hands toying with the hem of her dress. Tears that had been shed not long ago shimmered delicately beneath her eyelashes while she was not crying. Immediately, a strong desire to protect others swept over him. But he managed to keep it in, narrowly. Queen Camilla came into his line of sight afterwards. She maintained an upright position with her chin slightly elevated, but her hands clenched as if grasping for something, and the anxious strain in her jaw were plain to see. For an instant, they met each other's gaze. William remained silent. That wasn't necessary. Words could hardly convey the anticipation in his stillness. An uncanny silence descended upon the garden. Speech ceased in the middle of a phrase. The little ones, who had just been playing with balloons or sucking ice lollies as they melted, became completely motionless. Every royal has those moments when they let their emotions get the best of them, and this was definitely one of those times. No one in attendance was surprised to learn that they were seeing something more than the usual scripted monarchy. A father was being observed. William shrugged and ignored the onlookers as he strolled by the tables of uncut cakes and the photographers who were acting as if they didn't see him. He crouched down softly, careless of his suit brushing against the soft soil, as his long strides brought him to Charlotte's side. Gently resting one hand on her back, he drew near, his voice barely audible to anybody but her. A single shudder ran down her spine as she gave a subtle nod. The rage that William possessed, concealed beneath a calm exterior, festered within his eyes. The tightening of his jaw and the subtle narrowing of his eyes were visible to those who were familiar with him. Subtly but surely, he straightened his back and stood up straight again. Even after turning to Camilla, he remained silent. "I am not ready just yet." The tension between them was palpable in the empty space between them. There was no consideration of politics, succession, or titles at that moment. It was about a dad who felt compelled to know why his child was hurting after witnessing it. The outcome of this garden party, and maybe even something more sinister within the royal family, would depend on what happened next. The maternal inclination. Princess Charlotte was approached by Prince William without hesitance. Like a man juggling passion and duty, his movements were quick but measured. He bent down to her level, his towering stature folding like a dancer who had been there 100 times, but never quite like this. With all the joy of a little girl discovering her safe haven during a storm, Charlotte leaned into his arms as he opened them. His hug was protective and firm. subtle enough to avoid attracting any further attention beyond what was necessary at that particular moment. "Tell me what happened, my love," William inquired in a low, calm voice that was tinged with something more pointed. Those closest to the speaker picked up on the change in tone, which was gentle but commanding. Charlotte muttered something into his ear as she leaned her face against his shoulder. Despite how muted her words were, they clearly had an impact. Every part of William's physique shifted. He gently stood up, taking his daughter with
him, after tightening his grip on Charlotte's arm. His shoulders were squared, his jaw was set, and the once warm concern in his gaze had turned into the icy concentration of a man facing a crossed line. He shifted his attention to Camilla. Those guests who had pretended to mingle earlier now had their attention squarely on the scene before them. Unconsciously clutching napkins, some cradled teacups in the air, while others did the same. They were glued to the royal showdown unfolding before their very eyes. People stood transfixed, captivated by the awe-inspiring scene before them. A royal couple was not being observed. A parent shielding his daughter from harm was what they witnessed. Camilla maintained her composure, however her face revealed her true feelings. She seemed to be trying to explain, take the lead, or fix whatever had gone wrong. However, she remained stationary. Without uttering a word, her hands quivered at her sides. She appeared to be a mere bystander in the midst of another person's tempest, despite having been the monarch of hospitality earlier in the day, showering sugared goodies and garden smiles. It appeared for an extended period of time that Prince William might utter something that would irreparably shatter the unity picture. A potential royal rupture, with a protecting prince facing up against the queen consort herself, teetered on the brink of the headlines. Nevertheless, a surprising turn of events ensued. A little tug from Charlotte's sleeve went up her father's arm. A little but firm voice from her lips as she gazed up at him, her quiet courage resonating in the stillness. "Hold on, Dad." Simply by speaking, she diffused the situation. William lowered his hard eyes to hers, and a grin spread across his face. All the anger he felt, whatever he was about to say, died down when he thought about his daughter. His natural inclination to protect was still there, but he felt a newfound confidence in Charlotte's voice that was calming him down. Everything would be changed by her next words. A startling disclosure. While Prince William cradled his daughter in his arms, Charlotte leaned in close once more, murmuring something else into his ear. Even though her voice was scarcely audible to those around, William could feel its impact. Nothing moved in him. As he felt the full force of her words, the ferocity that had consumed him moments before appeared to subside. His forehead wrinkled. His jaw relaxed, not out of wrath but after coming to terms with something. After staring at Camilla with an angry glare, his gaze slowly moved away from the argument. They were instead holding on to something more complex, something that was close to understanding but nonetheless tinged with sadness. Stunned and confused, the guests observed in quiet awe. From her distance, Camilla appeared little. She no longer possessed the self-assurance that she had displayed during the day. Fearful and unsure of what was to come, her gloved hands quivered slightly and her gaze wandered between William and Charlotte. She had lost all resemblance to the elegant hostess who had previously strolled the garden paths. She appeared frail, human, and exhausted. William carefully helped Charlotte stand up. He hesitated before speaking. As a subtle gesture of support, he put a reassuring hand on her back. His steps echoed gently on the grass as he guided her toward Camilla. As the injured princess approached the woman who had wronged her, the onlookers remained motionless. Has evolved into more than simply a kid. With a voice that was equal parts reassuring and determined, William spoke to Charlotte. "You should probably inform Grandmama about what you mentioned to me." Camilla saw Charlotte's face as she raised it to hers. Tears trailed down her cheeks, yet a fresh expression was in her eyes. Neither anger nor dread, but an unflinching resolve that shocked even her lifelong friends and family. She stood tall and proud like her namesake at that moment, unflappable despite her youth. Amidst the hushed room, Charlotte spoke up. "I asked you why you look sad, Ms. For the reason that Grandpa Charles informed me that you miss your faraway grandchildren very